I found the paternity results in Jenny's nightstand drawer the evening before our gender reveal party. The betrayal was happening again, though this time her deception had been reborn with far more devastating consequences. The paper trembled in my hands as I read it once, twice, 3 times, hoping the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less painful. The child wasn't mine. Just like that, my future crumbled. The scent of her perfume, vanilla and jasmine, clung to the drawer, the same fragrance she'd worn during her first affair 3 years ago. I remember telling her then that I could forgive anything if she was honest, that I believed in second chances, that our 5 years of marriage meant something worth fighting for. What a fool I'd been. "James, are you upstairs?" Her voice floated up from the kitchen, making me flinch. The papers rustled in my suddenly clumsy hands as I shoved them back into the envelope. "Just getting changed," I called down, forcing steadiness into my voice while my heart raced beneath my ribs. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer, arranging her things exactly as I'd found them. The soft cotton of her scarves brushed against my fingers, items I had given her on birthdays and anniversaries, tokens of a love she had apparently never valued. As I closed the drawer, a cold clarity washed over me. This time would be different. This time I wouldn't break. When I came downstairs, Jenny was chopping vegetables for dinner, humming under her breath. 6 months pregnant and glowing, she looked up and smiled at me. That same smile I had trusted for 8 years. "There you are," she said. "I was thinking blue streamers would look better than the silver ones we bought. What do you think?" I studied her face, searching for any hint of guilt or remorse. There was nothing. Just the practiced innocence I now realized I'd been falling for our entire relationship. "I think blue is perfect," I said, matching her casual tone while something dark and determined solidified in my chest. "For a boy, right?" She beamed. "You think it's a boy, too? I just have this feeling." "A boy, not my boy." "Mother's intuition, I guess," I said, reaching for a glass of water to hide the bitterness in my expression. The ice cubes clinked against the glass, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the kitchen where I'd just decided my marriage was over. That night, after Jenny fell asleep, I crept back to her drawer. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet, each sound making me pause and hold my breath. I carefully extracted the envelope again and took it to my home office, where I made copies of every page. The mechanical hum of the printer seemed deafening in the quiet house, but Jenny didn't stir. I was returning the original documents when I heard her voice, hushed and urgent. She was on the phone. "Doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. "Everything's going according to plan. I know. Once the baby comes, it'll be easier to... Yes, I promise. It's working perfectly." I froze in the hallway, my body going cold despite the warm summer night. The low murmur of her voice continued as I silently retreated to the guest bedroom. I couldn't bear to sleep beside her. Not anymore. Lying in the dark, staring at unfamiliar shadows on an unfamiliar ceiling, I made my decision. The first time she betrayed me, I had crumbled. I had begged her to stay, promised I would be better, more attentive, more worthy of her love. I had been pathetic. Not this time. This time betrayal had birthed something else in me, something cold and calculating. I closed my eyes and felt tears slide down into my hair, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The charade was over. I didn't have to pretend anymore. Morning arrived with the smell of pancakes and coffee wafting up the stairs. I had barely slept, but adrenaline kept me sharp as I showered and dressed. Today was the gender reveal party, and I had preparations of my own to make. When I entered the kitchen, Jenny was already in full hostess mode, arranging platters and checking her list. She'd changed her perfume. A subtle difference most wouldn't notice, but it was the same alteration she'd made 3 years ago. The scent that meant she was meeting him. "There you are. Can you pick up the confetti cannon before noon? The party store opens at 10. She didn't meet my eyes, focused instead on her phone. "And Mom called. They'll be here early to help set up." "Sure," I said, pouring myself coffee. My hand was steady now. "I'll take care of the cannon." She looked up then, finally, and for a moment I thought I saw something, uncertainty, perhaps guilt, flicker across her face. "You okay? You were in the guest room last night?" I took a deliberate sip of coffee. "Just didn't want to disturb you. You need your rest." Relief visibly washed over her. "You're sweet. That's why I love you." The lie hung between us, almost palpable in the sunlit kitchen. I nodded and grabbed my keys, eager to escape the suffocating presence of her deception. "I'll be back with the cannon," I said. But first I had a stop to make. The office supply store was empty that early on a Saturday. I printed multiple copies of the paternity results, sized perfectly to fit inside the confetti cannon. The girl behind the counter raised an eyebrow at my request for help cutting the paper into small rectangles, but I just smiled and told her it was for a special announcement. "Gender reveal?" she asked, helping me feed the pages into the cutting machine. "Something like that," I replied, watching as the evidence of my wife's betrayal was transformed into festive confetti. "It's going to be quite the surprise." Our backyard transformed throughout the morning. Blue and pink balloons tied to every surface, a catered spread on tables covered in question-mark patterned cloths, and Jenny's mother directing the whole operation like a general commanding troops. I moved through it all like a ghost, setting up chairs and hanging decorations while my mind stayed fixed on the moment to come. The confetti cannon sat innocuously by the gift table, modified while Jenny was busy showing her mother the nursery for the 10th time. No one noticed as I carefully replaced the store-bought confetti with my own version, each piece containing a fragment of the truth, designed to rain down on our gathered friends and family in devastating clarity. Guests began arriving at 2. They brought gifts and champagne and excited chatter about whether we'd be welcoming a son or daughter. Old college friends, colleagues, neighbors, all embracing Jenny, placing hands on her swollen belly, congratulating me with hearty slaps on the back. I accepted their good wishes with a practiced smile that never reached my eyes. "James, get over here, man!" I turned to see Ryan Thompson approaching, and my blood went cold. Jenny's old friend from work. I'd always had suspicions about him, especially during her first affair, but she'd insisted I was being paranoid. Now, watching him navigate the crowd with confident familiarity, I knew. "Ryan," I said, shaking his hand with a firm grip that made him wince slightly. "Didn't know Jenny invited you?" "Last-minute thing," he said with a grin that suggested otherwise. "Wouldn't miss this for the world." My attention caught on the thin leather bracelet around his wrist, an intricate design with small metal studs. An exact match to the one Jenny had been wearing for the past month, claiming it was a gift from the girls at work. Ryan made his way to Jenny, who was holding court near the food table. When they embraced, I noticed how his hand lingered too long on her lower back, how she leaned in to whisper something that made him laugh. I moved closer, pretending to adjust a centerpiece. "After he's gone, we won't have to worry anymore," I caught her saying. Ryan nodded, glancing my way. They separated quickly when they noticed me nearby. "James, come to a toast with us," Jenny called, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Everyone's waiting." I approached as glasses of sparkling cider were distributed. Jenny's father handed me the microphone from our rented sound system, and suddenly all eyes were on me. "To James," Jenny interrupted before I could speak, raising her glass with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Who's been so supportive during this pregnancy? You'll always have a special place in the baby's life, no matter what the future holds." The crowd murmured in appreciation of what seemed like a sweet sentiment. Only I heard the subtle emphasis on special place and no matter what, the careful wording that absolved her of outright lying while setting the stage for my eventual replacement. The wooden deck creaked beneath my feet as I shifted my weight, absorbing this new, public betrayal. The microphone felt heavy in my hand. For a moment, I considered exploding right there, exposing her in front of everyone without the theatrical setup I'd planned. Instead, I smiled and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice steady despite the rage thundering through me. "And to truth finally coming to light." Jenny's smile faltered slightly, but she covered it quickly with a sip of her drink. "If you'll excuse me," I added, handing the microphone back to her father. "Nature calls." I made my way through the crowd, acknowledging congratulations with nods and brief smiles. Inside the house, instead of heading to the bathroom, I circled back through the kitchen and slipped out the side door. The confetti cannon needed one final adjustment. When I returned to the party, Jenny was opening gifts, exclaiming over tiny outfits and baby gadgets. She looked up, searching for me, a flicker of concern crossing her face when our eyes met. I gave her a reassuring nod and moved to stand beside her, the perfect supportive husband. "Time for the big reveal," Jenny's mother announced after the gifts were opened. "Everyone gather round." Guests formed an expectant semicircle as Jenny and I were positioned behind the confetti cannon. The photographer Jenny had hired started clicking away, documenting what everyone assumed would be a joyful milestone. "Together on 3, Jenny said, placing her hand over mine on the cannon's trigger. Her palm was sweaty against my skin. Was it nerves about the gender reveal, or guilt about the secret she thought was still safely hidden? 1. Her voice rang out clear and excited. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, almost drowning out the countdown. 2. Ryan stood directly in front of us, phone raised to capture the moment. The bracelet gleamed on his wrist. 3. We pressed the trigger together, and the cannon erupted with a sharp pop. But instead of the blue or pink confetti everyone expected, hundreds of white paper rectangles shot into the air, fluttering down on the stunned crowd like rectangular snowflakes. Confusion gave way to shock as people began to pick up the pieces, reading the fragments of medical jargon and conclusive statements about paternity. Jenny's face drained of color as she grabbed frantically at the falling papers, trying to comprehend what was happening. "What is this?" she gasped, turning to me with wide, panicked eyes. "James, what did you do?" I stepped back, creating distance between us as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ryan was backing away, crumpling papers in his fist, looking for an escape route. "My lawyer will be contacting you on Monday," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden hush. "I suggest you find one of your own." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked through the parting crowd. Someone, her mother, I think, called my name, but I didn't look back. The sound of Jenny's desperate sobs faded as I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the shattered remains of our life together. The taste of victory was bitter on my tongue, but beneath it lay something sweeter, the first step toward freedom. I spent the night in a hotel, my phone turned off, allowing myself the luxury of disconnecting from the chaos I'd unleashed. When I finally powered it back on Sunday morning, I had 73 missed calls, 42 voicemails, and over 100 text messages. I ignored them all and called my bank instead. Too late. Our joint accounts had been emptied at 8:17 that morning. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed," the weekend manager explained uncomfortably. "Mrs. Reed had equal access to those accounts. There was nothing legally preventing her from withdrawing the funds." I thanked him calmly and ended the call, then methodically worked my way through canceling joint credit cards and securing what assets I could still protect. The betrayal stung, but didn't surprise me. It was almost comforting to have my darkest suspicions about Jenny confirmed so thoroughly. When I arrived at my office Monday morning, hoping to lose myself in work, I found an email from HR asking for an urgent meeting. My boss, Leonard, looked distinctly uncomfortable when I entered the conference room. "James, we've received some concerning information about your personal conduct," he began, glancing at a folder in front of him. "Several complaints about erratic behavior, suggestions of potential substance abuse issues, even allegations of workplace harassment." I sat stunned as he outlined a litany of fabricated offenses, each more absurd than the last. It didn't take much to guess the source. "These accusations came from my wife," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. Leonard shifted uncomfortably. "And several of her friends who claim to have witnessed concerning behavior. Given your position and the sensitive nature of our client relationships, we need to place you on administrative leave while we investigate." I left the building in a daze, security escorting me out as though I were already guilty. The static crackle of the security guard's walkie-talkie punctuated our silent walk to the exit, each burst of noise making me flinch. Outside, I loosened my tie, gulping down air that tasted of car exhaust and desperation. My professional reputation, built over a decade of 60-hour weeks and sacrificed weekends, was being systematically destroyed. I was unlocking my car when a voice rang out across the parking lot. "You think you can humiliate our daughter and get away with it?" Jenny's father stormed toward me, her mother and 2 brothers in tow. Their approach drew stares from people entering and exiting the building, colleagues who would now witness the next phase of my public unraveling. "Walter," I acknowledged, keeping my voice level despite the pounding in my chest. "I think we should discuss this privately." "Like hell we will," he spat, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You ambushed Jenny in front of everyone we know over some paranoid delusion. She's been hospitalized for stress that could harm the baby." The baby, not my baby. The reminder steeled me. "The paternity test wasn't a delusion," I said quietly, "and Jenny knows it." "Bullshit!" Jenny's brother Michael stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "You manipulated those results because you've never been man enough to accept that Jenny's success overshadowed yours." A small crowd had gathered, keeping a safe distance but watching avidly. Perfect. More witnesses to spread gossip about my supposed instability. "You have 5 seconds to leave," I said, my hand sliding into my pocket where my phone was already recording. "Or I'll call the police and file harassment charges." "You pathetic," Walter began, but his wife tugged at his arm. "He's recording us," she hissed. "That's what he wants." They retreated, Walter promising that this wasn't over, that I would regret what I'd done to their family. I watched them go, then sank into my car, hands shaking as adrenaline ebbed. My phone pinged with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your email. Anonymous friend with information you need." Normally, I'd dismiss such a cryptic message, but I had nothing left to lose. I opened my email to find a message containing only a link to a password-protected cloud storage folder. The password was Jenny's birthday. Inside was a scanned document that made my blood run cold, a surrender of parental rights form dated 7 years ago, before I'd even met Jenny, with her signature clearly visible at the bottom. The document referenced a child born in Seattle, given up for adoption at birth. The paper had several coffee stains along the edge, the same distinctive pattern I'd seen countless times on papers in Jenny's home office, where she always balanced her mug precariously on the edge of her desk. A child? Another child she'd never mentioned in 8 years together. I moved frantically through the folder, finding medical records, correspondence with an adoption agency, even photos of Jenny in a hospital gown, looking much younger, but unmistakably her. The father was listed as unknown on all documentation. A pattern emerged that I'd been too blind to see. Jenny created perfect, compartmentalized lives, then discarded them when they became inconvenient or when better opportunities arose. I was never her husband. I was a stepping stone, a temporary shelter until the next phase of her plan could be implemented. My phone rang. Caller ID showed Andrew Kessler, a lawyer who had graduated law school with me before I switched to finance. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years, grabbing occasional drinks when our busy schedules allowed. I hadn't spoken to him in months. "James," he said when I answered, "I just heard. What the hell is going on?" I gave him the condensed version, my voice clinical and detached, as though discussing a case study rather than the implosion of my life. "Christ," he exhaled when I finished. "I'm at Maxwell and Palmer now, heading up family law. Come to my office, today. This needs a strategic response before she does any more damage." 2 hours later, we sat across from each other at a restaurant near his office, the smell of garlic bread wafting from a nearby table. The scent transported me back to my first date with Jenny at an Italian restaurant in Boston, where she'd told me she'd never found anyone she could trust completely. Until me. "Earth to James," Andrew said, snapping me back to the present. "This is serious. She's moving fast and fighting dirty." He laid out a battle plan. Emergency motions to freeze remaining assets, documentation of her false allegations, preparations for both divorce and the inevitable custody fight she would wage once the child was born. "Custody," I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "The baby isn't mine." Andrew tilted his head. "Legally, it might be. You're married. Your name will go on the birth certificate automatically in most states. We'd need to fight it, but—" He paused, studying my face. "Unless you want to maintain legal rights? Some men choose to—" "No," I said firmly. "I want a complete separation. Legally, financially, in every way possible." Andrew nodded and made a note. "One more thing," he said carefully. "Given how aggressive she's being, I have to ask, do you have resources she doesn't know about? Family money? Accounts in your name only? We're looking at a significant legal battle." I hesitated, then told him what I'd told no one since moving to this city. My family has money, old money, but I walked away from it 10 years ago. Andrew's eyebrows shot up. "Define money." "The Reed shipping fortune. My father is William Reed." Recognition dawned on his face. "Holy shit, James, that's significant. Would they help?" The rain tapped rhythmically against the restaurant window as I considered this question. I hadn't spoken to my father in years, not since I'd rejected the family business to forge my own path. Our last conversation had been ugly, culminating in his prediction that I'd come crawling back when real life proved too difficult. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I guess it's time to find out." That night, I stood in my hotel room staring at my father's contact in my phone. My thumb hovered over the call button as memories flooded back. The suffocating expectations, the constant pressure to uphold the Reed legacy, the coldness that permeated our family's sprawling New England estate. I had fled that life at 22, determined to succeed on my own merits rather than my surname. I'd changed my name slightly, from Reed Hamilton to just Reed, moved across the country, and built a career without leveraging family connections. Jenny had known only the vaguest outlines of my background, that I came from a comfortable New England family I was estranged from. She had never pressed for details, something I'd attributed to respect for my privacy, but now recognized as lack of interest in anything that didn't serve her purposes. The call connected on the third ring. "James." My father's voice hadn't changed, authoritative with the slight patrician accent that generations of privilege had cultivated. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. "Father," I replied, my throat suddenly dry. "I need to talk to you." A pause. "I assumed as much. It's been 4 years." Had it really been that long? I closed my eyes, gathering strength. "I'm in trouble. Not legal trouble, but my marriage is over. It's complicated and ugly, and I need help." Another, longer pause. I could picture him in his study, swirling scotch in a crystal tumbler, weighing his response. "I'm listening," he finally said. I told him everything. Meeting Jenny, our marriage, her first affair, the pregnancy, the paternity test, the gender reveal disaster, the financial and professional sabotage. The words poured out of me with a velocity that surprised even me, as though I'd been holding them back by sheer force of will. When I finished, the line was so silent I thought we'd been disconnected. "Are you still there?" I asked. "I'm here," he replied, his voice softer than I'd heard it in decades. "I'm sorry, James. No one deserves such betrayal." Something broke inside me at those words, the simple acknowledgement of my pain from the man who had always taught me that emotions were weaknesses to be overcome. To my horror, I began to cry, muffling the sound with my hand over the phone. "What do you need?" he asked when I had regained control. "Resources for a legal battle. Temporary financial support until I can access my accounts or get back to work. And..." I hesitated, then pushed forward. "I need the family's help to fight this on equal footing. She's destroying everything I've built." "Done?" he said without hesitation. "I'll have Sterling transfer funds to a new account today, and I'll call Marcus Blake at Blake, Winters, and Thurman. They handle all our legal matters in your region." I nearly dropped the phone. Blake, Winters, and Thurman was the most prestigious law firm in the state, known for their scorched earth approach to litigation. "That's not necessary," I began. "I have a friend who—" "James," my father interrupted. "You didn't call me for halfway measures. You called because you know what the read name means. It's time to use it." He was right, of course. I had spent a decade running from my family's power and influence, only to come crawling back to it the moment I needed protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. "All right," I conceded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "But do come home when this is over. Your mother would like to see you." The call ended, and I sat heavily on the edge of the hotel bed, feeling both relief and a strange sense of defeat. The leather chair in my father's study seemed to materialize in my memory, the way it squeaked when he leaned back to deliver judgment on some perceived failure or inadequacy of mine. Now that same authority would be directed at Jenny, and despite everything, I felt a moment's pity for what was coming her way. That moment passed quickly. By morning, I had access to a newly created account with more money than I'd earned in the past 5 years combined. By afternoon, I was sitting in the opulent offices of Blake, Winters, and Thurman, watching Marcus Blake himself review my case with the cold efficiency of a surgeon deciding where to cut. "Your father explained the situation," he said, not looking up from the documents spread before him. "We'll handle this discreetly but decisively." "I don't need discretion anymore," I replied. "She's already dragging my name through the mud." Blake looked up, his steel-gray eyes assessing me with new interest. "Good. That makes our job easier." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Send in Miss Reeves with the PI file." A moment later, a sharply dressed woman entered, carrying a thick manila envelope that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. She placed it on the desk without a word and exited, closing the door silently behind her. "We took the liberty of beginning our standard background investigation as soon as your father called," Blake explained, opening the envelope and spreading out its contents. "Ryan Thompson has quite the interesting history." I leaned forward, scanning documents that detailed Ryan's professional misconduct allegations at 2 previous employers, a DUI that had been quietly settled, and financial records showing him deeply in debt, despite his outward appearance of success. "He's desperate," Blake concluded, "and desperate people make mistakes. We'll be watching for them." For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo. I moved from the hotel to a furnished executive apartment arranged by Blake's office. I received daily updates from the team of lawyers and investigators now dedicated to my case. I navigated the hostile landscape of my professional life, where Jenny's allegations had created a minefield of suspicious glances and whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Then, unexpectedly, Jenny reached out. "We need to talk," her text read. "Just the 2 of us, please." Against the advice of Blake and his team, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where the constant flow of customers would prevent any scene. She was waiting when I arrived, hands wrapped around a mug, looking smaller somehow. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, her face thinner. She'd been crying, the skin around her eyes puffy and red. "James," she said as I sat down across from her, "thank you for coming." I said nothing, waiting. The silence stretched between us. "I've made terrible mistakes," she finally continued, "but we can fix this. For the baby's sake, we should try to work things out." "The baby isn't mine," I reminded her, keeping my voice low. "You could be its father in all the ways that matter," she insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. "We have history, James. 8 years. That means something." I felt the expensive fabric of my new suit rustle as I shifted in my seat, maintaining the distance between us. This suit, another gift from my father, tailored precisely to my measurements, though I hadn't seen him in years, was a constant reminder of the world I'd rejected but now embraced again. "Why did you do it?" I asked instead of responding to her plea. "Not just the affair or the lies about the baby. Why try to destroy my career, my reputation? You already had what you wanted." Something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, weighing how much to admit. "I was scared," she said finally. "When I saw what you did at the party, I panicked. I thought if I discredited you first, no one would believe the paternity test was real." It was the first honest thing she'd said, but it was only part of the truth. The documents I'd found, the conversation I'd overheard, they pointed to a longer, more calculated deception. "And the baby you gave up 7 years ago?" I asked quietly. "Were you scared then too?" Her face went completely white. "How did you—" She stopped, composing herself. "That was different. I was young, alone. I did what I had to do." "You've never been alone, Jenny. You've always had someone taking care of you, believing in you, supporting you. You just discard them when more convenient options come along." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's not fair. I loved you, James. I still do." "No," I said, standing up. "You loved what I provided. Security, stability, respectability. But that's over now." As I walked away, she called after me. "You have no idea what you're doing. You don't know who you're dealing with." I turned back, a strange calm settling over me. "Neither do you." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with uncomfortable wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Jenny sat across the aisle with her lawyer, a young man who kept checking his watch and shifting nervously in his seat. Her parents flanked her, Walter glaring in my direction while her mother stared straight ahead. Marcus Blake sat beside me, immaculate in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, reviewing notes with 2 associates. My father had insisted on coming as well, and now sat directly behind me, a physical reminder of the forces I'd brought to bear. The air conditioning hummed loudly in the background, a monotonous sound that seemed to heighten the tension rather than mask it. When the judge entered, the gasps from the gallery were audible over that mechanical drone. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Reed Williams," the bailiff announced. My heart stuttered. Eleanor Reed Williams, my father's sister, my aunt. I turned to Blake with wide eyes, but he merely gave an almost imperceptible nod. Of course, this had been orchestrated from the moment I'd called my father. Jenny's lawyer clearly recognized the name too, his face draining of color as he leaned over to whisper urgently to his client. Judge Reed Williams showed no sign of recognizing me as she called the court to order and addressed the assembly with brisk efficiency. If anything, she seemed especially formal, aware of the potential appearance of impropriety. "Before we begin," she announced, "I should disclose that the petitioner shares my family name. While I do not believe this presents a conflict of interest, if either party wishes to request a different judge, they may do so now." Jenny's lawyer stood immediately. "Your Honor, we would like to request—" "No," Jenny interrupted, tugging at his sleeve. They conferred in heated whispers before he reluctantly sat down again. "We have no objection, Your Honor," he stated, though his tense posture suggested otherwise. The hearing proceeded, with Blake presenting our initial filings with surgical precision. The paternity test results, financial records showing the emptied accounts, documentation of the false allegations against me at work, and affidavits from witnesses at the gender reveal party. Then came the master stroke. Blake introduced evidence I hadn't seen before. Text messages between Jenny and Ryan going back 3 years, retrieved through legal discovery, detailing not just their affair, but their plans for my replacement. "Once we have the baby, he'll be easy to push out," one message from Jenny read. "He's always wanted kids so badly, he'll give us anything to stay in its life. Then when I file for divorce later, we'll have everything." The gallery erupted in murmurs as more messages were read into the record, each more damning than the last. Jenny sank lower in her seat, her lawyer frantically scribbling notes. When Blake introduced the evidence about her previous child, connecting it to a pattern of deception and manipulation, Jenny finally broke. She stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "This is a witch hunt!" she cried. "You're all in on it together. The almighty Reed's closing ranks." "Miss Carlson," Judge Reed Williams said sharply, using Jenny's maiden name with pointed emphasis, "control yourself or you will be held in contempt." The use of her maiden name, a subtle indication that the court was already leaning toward granting the annulment rather than a standard divorce, was not lost on Jenny or her lawyer. She collapsed back into her seat, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. As the hearing concluded, Judge Reed Williams issued temporary orders freezing all remaining assets and scheduling a full hearing in 30 days. She also ordered supervised visitation for Ryan Thompson with any future children, citing the concerning nature of the text messages as evidence of potential parental alienation. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, tipped off, no doubt, by Blake's team about the salacious details of the case. Camera flashes stung my eyes as I emerged, Blake and my father creating a protective barrier on either side. I kept my head down, offering no comment as we moved toward the waiting town car. Behind us, a commotion broke out. Ryan Thompson, who had been subpoenaed to appear but had failed to show, was being led up the courthouse steps in handcuffs. "What's happening?" I asked Blake as we paused to watch. "Bench warrant for contempt of court," he replied with satisfaction. "And it seems the police found some interesting items in his possession when they picked him up. Controlled substances, primarily." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the courthouse entryway, audible even from our position across the plaza. Ryan's face was a mask of panic as he spotted Jenny, who had emerged behind us and now stood frozen on the steps, watching her lover being led away. "This isn't over, Reed," Ryan shouted, struggling against the officers restraining him. "You think you've won? You don't know what's coming. Blake placed a firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me toward the car. Actually, he murmured, I believe we do. The story broke across local media by evening and had expanded to national outlets by the following day. Headlines screamed about the gender reveal revenge and baby daddy drama, while more reputable sources focused on the legal implications of paternity fraud. Jenny's name and face were everywhere, her deception laid bare for public consumption. I took no pleasure in her humiliation, but I couldn't deny the vindication I felt seeing the truth finally exposed. For months, she had been constructing an elaborate fiction while I played the oblivious husband. Now the roles were reversed. I was the one with hidden knowledge and power, while she scrambled to understand how thoroughly she'd been outmaneuvered. A week after the hearing, I received a call from Blake. There's been a development, he said without preamble. Jenny had a breakdown at her parents' weekend gathering. Apparently, they've been questioning her version of events since the hearing, and it all came to a head last night. What happened? I asked, uncertain how to feel about this news. According to our source, she was confronted by her mother about the previous child and the paternity deception. She denied everything at first, became increasingly agitated, then suddenly confessed to the entire scheme. There was quite a scene. She knocked over a glass of wine that shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound apparently silenced the entire room, just as she was shouting that she never loved you, that she'd been planning to leave with Ryan for over a year. The revelation should have hurt, but instead I felt oddly peaceful. Her confession simply confirmed what I already knew, validating my decision to fight back rather than submit to her manipulation again. Her parents have cut her off financially, Blake continued. They're concerned about family reputation. This works in our favor. She'll be more amenable to our settlement terms without their backing. It was all so calculated, so coldly efficient. I was becoming what I'd once rejected, a reed using power and influence to crush opposition. But I couldn't find it in myself to stop. Not yet. 3 weeks later, the intercom in my apartment buzzed at 1:17 a.m. I squinted at the security monitor to see Jenny standing in the lobby, swaying slightly, her face tear-streaked and desperate. Against my better judgment, I buzzed her up. When I opened the door, the scent of desperation wafted from her, a mixture of stale perfume, alcohol, and what I could only describe as fear sweat. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. The confident, composed woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "James," she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, allowing her to enter the apartment Blake had arranged for me. It was minimally furnished but expensive, all clean lines and neutral tones, nothing personal or revealing. A temporary space for a transitional life. "I've lost everything," she said without preamble, standing in the center of the living room like she was afraid to touch anything. "Ryan's gone. He took a plea deal and left town. My parents won't speak to me. My friends—" She laughed bitterly. "Turns out they weren't really my friends." I remained silent, watching her unravel. "You were the only real thing in my life," she continued, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "The only person who ever truly loved me, and I threw it away. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Just talk to me. Tell me how to fix this." The rawness of her plea almost moved me. Almost. But I remembered how convincing she'd been 3 years ago, weeping and promising it would never happen again. I remembered her voice on the phone. It's working perfectly. "There's nothing to fix, Jenny," I said quietly. "It's over." "Don't say that." She moved toward me, reaching for my hands, which I kept firmly at my sides. "We can start fresh. I'll do anything. Therapy, a post-nuptial agreement, Whatever you want. Just don't throw away 8 years over one mistake." It wasn't one mistake. It was a calculated campaign of deception. My voice remained calm, detached. "You were planning to use a child you knew wasn't mine, to manipulate me emotionally and financially." She flinched at the accuracy of my assessment, but quickly rallied. I was confused, scared. Ryan pressured me. "Stop lying," I interrupted. "Just stop. I've seen the texts. I know this was your plan from the beginning." Her shoulders sagged in defeat. She looked older suddenly, the weight of her actions aging her beyond her 32 years. "What happens now?" she whispered. In answer, I walked to the kitchen counter where a manila envelope lay. I returned and handed it to her silently. "What's this?" she asked, opening it cautiously as though expecting another trick. "Divorce papers. My final offer. It's generous considering the circumstances. More generous than Blake wanted to be. Sign them, and this ends quietly." She scanned the document, her eyes widening. "You're not seeking alimony or punitive damages?" "I don't want anything from you, Jenny. I just want this to be over." A spark of the old Jenny, calculating, assessing advantages, flickered across her face. "If I don't sign?" "Then we continue in court. You've seen what my family can do. This is your chance to walk away before it gets worse." She stood silently, weighing her options. Then, with a defeated sigh, she placed the envelope on the coffee table. "I need time to think, to talk to my lawyer." "Of course," I said. "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer is withdrawn." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "I did love you, James. Maybe not the way you deserved, but in my way, I did." I said nothing as she left, the door closing softly behind her. Her words, a final manipulation, or a glimpse of genuine remorse? It no longer mattered. 2 days later, Jenny's lawyer contacted Blake. They wanted a meeting to discuss terms. The conference room at Blake, Winters, and Thurman was designed to intimidate. All dark wood and leather chairs, with a view of the city skyline that emphasized just how far above ordinary concerns its occupants operated. Jenny sat across the table, flanked by her lawyer, and, surprisingly, her father Walter. "Mr. Carlson," Blake acknowledged with a nod, "I wasn't aware you were representing your daughter's interests in this matter." Walter cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm here as moral support only, and to make an offer." He slid a check across the table, a sum with enough zeros to make most people reconsider nearly any position. I felt the rough texture of the paper as I picked it up, examining it briefly before tearing it in half and placing the pieces back on the table. "What is this supposed to be?" I asked. "Compensation," Walter replied stiffly, "for the distress our family has caused you, in exchange for your discretion going forward and a non-disparagement agreement." "You want to buy my silence," I translated. "To protect your family name." "To protect everyone," Jenny's lawyer interjected smoothly, "including you, Mr. Reed. No one benefits from having these private matters further aired in public." I looked at Jenny, who hadn't met my eyes since entering the room. "Is this what you want? To pretend none of this happened?" She finally looked up. "I want to move on. We all do." For a moment, I considered it. The money was insignificant to me now, with my renewed access to the Reed fortune. But the principle, the audacity of thinking cash could erase betrayal, sparked a slow-burning anger in my chest. "No," I said simply. Walter blinked in confusion. "No? Perhaps the amount—" "It's not about the amount," I cut him off. "I'm declining your offer entirely." "Be reasonable, James," Jenny said, leaning forward. "This benefits everyone, a clean break." "A cover-up, you mean, so you can construct a new narrative where you're not the villain." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. The answer is no. I want nothing from any of you except what's legally mine, and the truth on record." As we left the meeting, Blake looked at me curiously. "That was a substantial offer to decline on principle," he observed. "Are you sure vindication is worth more?" I considered his question as we rode the elevator down to the lobby. "It's not about vindication anymore," I said finally. "It's about being able to look at myself in the mirror. I spent 3 years letting her manipulation define my reality. I won't let money do the same." 3 days later, the definitive DNA results arrived, confirming what we already knew. The child Jenny carried was not mine. Biologically or legally, I would have no connection to it. A fact formalized in the court documents Blake was finalizing. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at the clinical language of the lab report. For months, I had believed I was going to be a father. I had read parenting books, researched car seats, imagined teaching a child to ride a bike and throw a ball. Now that future had evaporated, leaving a strange emptiness behind. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room. Each second marking time I would now spend differently than I had planned. The sound should have been maddening, but instead, I found it oddly comforting, a reminder that life continues moment by moment, regardless of our expectations. My phone rang. It was Jenny, calling against Blake's explicit instructions not to contact me directly. "I need to see you," she said without greeting. "One last time." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, James, I'm leaving town tomorrow, for good. Just give me 30 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a park near my apartment. It was nearly sunset when I arrived, the last golden light of day stretching long shadows across the grass. Jenny was already there, sitting on a bench overlooking the small lake. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching ducks glide across the water's surface. "I'm moving back to Seattle," she finally said. "Starting over. Again?" I nodded but said nothing. "I've been seeing a therapist," she continued, "trying to understand why I do these things, why I can't seem to be honest, even with myself." She turned to face me. "I'm not asking for another chance. I know that's gone. I needed you to know that I recognize what I did to you was unforgivable." "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to hear it, and because I need to say it, the baby." She placed a hand on her swollen belly. "He'll be adopted by a family in Oregon, a good family. I'm doing the right thing for once." The irony wasn't lost on me. History repeating itself, another child given up. But I couldn't judge her for it. Sometimes walking away was the most responsible choice. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Jenny," I said, and meant it. She reached for my hand, but I stood before she could touch me. "Goodbye, Jenny." As I walked away, she called after me. "James, will you ever forgive me?" I stopped and turned back. In the fading light, with tears streaming down her face, she looked like the woman I had once loved with my whole heart. But that woman had never really existed. "No," I said simply, and continued walking. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home on Lake Winnipesaukee, morning sunlight streaming through the windows and warming my skin as I made coffee. The house, a modernized cabin with expansive glass and natural wood, represented my compromise with the past. It was 40 minutes from my family's estate, but firmly my own space. Purchased with my own money after returning to finance with a prestigious firm in Boston. The transition back to the East Coast had been easier than expected. My father and I had established a cautious new relationship, not the easy intimacy some fathers and sons enjoyed, but a respectful collaboration built on clearer boundaries than we'd had in my youth. I visited my parents for Sunday dinner twice a month. No more, and no less. It was enough. My phone chimed with an email notification. Photographs from Andrew Kessler, who had relocated to California. The images showed him with his new fiancée on a beach, both grinning widely. "Life moves on," read his caption. Indeed it did. As I watered the row of herbs growing in pots along the windowsill, their fresh scent filled the kitchen. Basil, mint, rosemary, thyme. New growth cultivated by my own hands. There was something profoundly satisfying about nurturing these small, living things, watching them flourish under my care. The gossip about Jenny had faded months ago, replaced by newer scandals and dramas. Occasionally I heard fragments about her through mutual acquaintances. She had indeed moved to Seattle, had taken a position with a smaller company, was keeping a low profile. I felt nothing when I heard these updates, neither satisfaction nor regret. She had become a character in a story that no longer defined me. Ryan Thompson had served 6 months for drug possession and violated probation almost immediately upon release. His professional reputation was destroyed, his promising career in ruins. I couldn't bring myself to celebrate his downfall, but neither could I muster sympathy. Actions had consequences, a lesson I had learned forcefully myself. I carried my coffee onto the deck overlooking the lake, breathing in the crisp morning air. A loon called from somewhere across the water, its haunting cry echoing across the still surface. This peace had come at a high cost, but as I watched the sun climb higher in the sky, I knew it had been worth it. That afternoon, I drove into town for the farmer's market, another small pleasure in my reconfigured life. As I examined heirloom tomatoes at one stand, a voice spoke from beside me. "You have to smell them. It's the only way to know if they're really ripe." I turned to see a woman with curly dark hair and amused eyes demonstrating her technique, lifting a tomato to her nose and inhaling deeply. "See? This one's perfect." She offered it to me. "Try." Caught off guard by her easy friendliness, I followed her example. The rich, earthy scent was indeed remarkable, nothing like the pale imitations sold in supermarkets. "You're right," I acknowledged, adding several to my basket. "Thanks for the tip." "Happy to help." She smiled, extending her hand. "I'm Elena, local tomato enthusiast and occasionally useful stranger." "James," I replied, shaking her hand. "New resident and grateful recipient of produce wisdom." We walked through the market together, comparing notes on the best vendors and products. Her laughter mingled with the street sounds, conversations, a musician playing guitar, children running between stalls, creating a soundtrack of ordinary life that I found unexpectedly moving. "So, what brought you to the lake?" she asked as we stopped for coffee. "You said you're new here?" "A fresh start," I said simply. "Needed a change of scenery." She nodded, accepting the abbreviated truth without pressing for details. "I get that. I moved here after my divorce 3 years ago. Best decision I ever made." We talked easily for another hour, about books and hiking trails and the best place to watch sunsets on the lake. When we parted, she gave me her number, in case you need more produce advice, with a smile that suggested she might be interested in more than discussions about tomatoes. I drove home with her number in my phone and a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Whether anything would come of our meeting was impossible to know, but the possibility alone felt significant. A door opening where I had expected only walls. That evening, I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. From my phone came the soft notes of a jazz piano piece, music I had rediscovered in recent months, part of reclaiming pleasures that had gotten lost in the wreckage of my marriage. Gentle waves lapped at the shore below, a rhythmic sound that had become the heartbeat of my days here. The water reflected the changing sky, transforming from blue to amber to deepening purple as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. In this moment of perfect tranquility, I realized I had finally found what had eluded me throughout the chaos of the past year. Peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but a deeper serenity that came from knowing myself, my boundaries, my values, my capacity for both compassion and self-protection. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead forced me to rebuild with stronger foundations. The pain Jenny inflicted had carved spaces within me that were now filling with new experiences, new possibilities, new understanding. I wouldn't thank her for it. The lessons had come at too high a price. But I could acknowledge that surviving her deception had made me more fully myself. As darkness settled over the lake and stars began to appear, I thought about calling Elena. Perhaps tomorrow. There was no rush, no desperate need to fill the silence or prove anything to anyone. For now, it was enough to sit alone in the gathering dusk, listening to the water and feeling at last that I was exactly where I belonged. The road forward would undoubtedly hold its own challenges and sorrows, moments of doubt and regret. But as I watched the first stars reflect in the dark water below, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, I would face it with clear eyes and an uncompromised heart. That was the real victory. Not the legal battle won or the public vindication, but this quiet restoration of self. In the end, I had not only survived betrayal, but emerged from it more whole than before. Not despite what I had lost, but because of it. The night air cooled around me as I finally stood to go inside, leaving behind the darkness and the gently lapping waves. Tomorrow would bring its own revelations, its own opportunities. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I looked forward to discovering what they might be.